we hear a lot of complaints about American education, and she's had a chance to kind of take a look at it and compare it with other countries, and she's written a book called World Class: One Mother's Journey Halfway Around the Globe in Search of the Best Education for Her Students. So let's welcome in Teru Clavel. Teru, how are you today?
I'm fine. How are you?
Now, where are you exactly as we speak to you?
Well, right now I am in New York City, but for the last 12 years I've been all over Asia, and I spent 2 years in California.
So did you start out as a global education consultant, or did you, just fall into it and it was a circumstance of what happened?
It's a really good question, actually. Work in 2006 took me to Hong Kong. I'm sorry if you hear my dog barking. I think first thing in the morning. She's excited to go. Yeah, but in 2006, I had 2 children under 2 years old, and a work opportunity took me there. And at the time, I had a completely different career, actually. And their experiences, having enrolled them in the local public schools of Hong Kong, then Shanghai, then Tokyo, and then Palo Alto, California, that all really informed my work as a comparative international education journalist. I actually went back to school for that subject in 2011. So,
excellent. So
yeah.
Then when your kids grew up, then obviously you began searching for education and opportunities and what does it mean. And why did you do that? Were the schools where you were insufficient, or you were just looking for better opportunities?
Well, that's a really good question. Typically the expatriate overseas will enroll their children into the international schools. And the international schools follow the curriculum of the country typically that you are from. So the American International School in Japan follows the U.S. curriculum. But I felt like it was such a great opportunity for my own children to not only learn as a native speaker the languages where we lived, but to really understand the culture. So while we chose an alternative path, really, my children came back kind of multicultural and being able to code switch between different languages. And something that was really great, I have to say, is that my children came back to the U.S. in middle school, my older 2 boys and then my daughter as well, years ahead in math, because the East Asian countries are, they're actually 3 years ahead by the time kids are 15 years old.
Now, does everyone... I mean, we have mandatory schools here. Is it like that in other countries?
Well, that's another great question, because compulsory education, where I was in China and in Japan, is from grade 1. So there is no kindergarten per se. There's a 3-year preschool, which is non-compulsory, but first grade is the start of elementary school, and then it ends at the end of middle school, which is 9th grade. So there are 3 years typically of middle school. Whereas in the U.S., it's literally kindergarten through the end of high school. And one of the reasons that's such a good question is because these top-performing East Asian countries, their 15-year-olds are graduating from middle school with all the academic learning that our top-level high school students have at age 18. And that's why they're literally 3 years ahead.
Wow. So as you went looking around, how did you compare things? Was it the end result? Was it the age? Was it money spent on the education?
So there's so many different factors. I would say the one that stood out the most for me, and I believe that we can do this in this country, the U.S., and I do discuss this in World Class. One thing is the teacher preparation. I mean, there's such an investment. It's a prioritized investment, over like the new bouncy seat or, let's say the $70 million football stadium. There's an investment in the teacher recruitment and retention and professional development. And what that means is they're literally recruiting the best and the brightest from those kids who are coming from undergraduate, right? So basically in Japan, there's a statistic that there were 38,000 spots to become teachers for 200,000 applicants. And it's just as hard, comparable in the U.S. would be, to pass the bar for lawyers or your medical exams for doctors as it is to become a teacher in Japan. And when you think about that, I mean, imagine if this country, we really invested in our teachers, right? And it's not their fault. We're not investing in training them, right? So imagine if all of our kids went to school and they had a lawyer or a doctor teaching them. It's a different level of education.
Right. And what about the cost, or did that really factor into your
So so for us it was free because we sent them to local public schools. And actually the international schools start at $20,000 per student up to even $45,000. So for us,
free even for someone from another country.
Yeah, it was because we paid the local taxes exactly. Yeah. But you bring up a good question about the funding model, because the U.S. actually spends more than, or is in the top 5 for spending per pupil than almost any other country in the world. Yet, what we don't really, I feel like, get right is how we spend that money. You know?
Let me ask you this. Yeah. One of the concerns in America, we have lots of local control. I'm going to bet, if I had to guess, they don't have that in these countries that you were talking about. It's a much more top-down approach. Am I right?
It is a much more top-down approach. Here, the average, for school spending is 45% local taxes, 45% from the state, and 10% from the federal government. And that's an average. It's not the same for all states. And in Japan, it is much more centralized. In China, it's not as much so. It depends on they have a much more equitable funding system, and it depends on really how wealthy the area is. So the more socioeconomically disadvantaged provinces will get significantly more funding from the central government. How I think that is more relevant to the actual classroom experience, though, is that the government is much more involved in mandating the curriculum. And here,
I don't think that many Americans would prefer it. They like the local control, I believe, and they would love to have the results, but obviously the results come at a cost of local control and more rigorous requirements and testing and crunching down to having 15-year-olds being equated to 18-year-olds here in terms of learning experience. Well, let me ask you, in the time we have remaining, what did you see that you think could be repeated here?
I mean, there are a couple things that you mentioned just now. That whole idea of rigor and, and maybe you want to call it old school, but I talk about this in World Class, where my son was kept after school starting in first grade if he didn't get a 95% or high, or if he didn't get a 95%, or higher on his arithmetic quiz. And it was nothing about getting into trouble or discipline. It was, hey, this is what we have to learn, and you're going to stay here until you do, because there's no way, if you don't understand fundamental arithmetic, that you're ever going to make it to, algebra or calculus, right? And I just feel like here, with so many opportunities for us to let kids pass 3, 4, 5 times with mastery, and then you have the, advanced kids who may be far more bored. We're not building a resiliency in our kids. We're not really forcing them to meet that higher standard by overcoming a challenge. And there's definitely, you can't speak black and white because we are so diverse in this country, but I do feel like we're missing the rigor. And the other thing that I would love to add is something that I loved in the Japanese classroom is this notion about being a part of something bigger than yourself. There are no janitors in the Japanese classrooms. There are no cafeteria workers. The kids actually have their own rags, and they clean the floors and the chalkboards, even the toilets. They serve each other lunch, and they clean up after one another. And it's because they're learning to be a part of this bigger community. And I really think this country could benefit from teaching our children, frankly, all of us right now, how to be a part of something bigger than ourselves.
Teru Clavel, a global education consultant and a mom, author of the new book, World Class, One Mother's Journey, halfway around the globe in search of the best education for her students. And obviously we just scratched the surface, but I thank you so much for you. What's your dog's name?
Oh my gosh, she debuted here, Hannah.
Hannah. Well, thanks, Hannah, for also being a guest. And I didn't get a chance. I hesitate to. I'm not going to ask you because I really have another guest coming and lots of things. I wish we had more time. Teru, thanks so much for being a part. I guess if they search for it on Amazon or any of the web, Google, they would find them.
Absolutely, Amazon.com. Teru Clavel. The book is World Class.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you. You too.
WSVA.